Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is episode 32 of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast, and I have a very special guest on today, Mr. Gereon Hempel. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on right now. I'm very thankful that I was able to connect with him within the last year. We both are in consulting now, and I formerly worked with Volkswagen in some capacity as well. And so we were able to finally get introduced and start talking a little bit more about this space. And it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Samantha. It's a joy to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself so that our audience knows a little bit more about you. And if anyone is listening in today, we'd love to know who's here. And please be thinking of questions throughout the show. We always love questions. We're both consultants now too, so we really love questions. So I hope people can give us some good questions today. But tell us a little bit more about yourself, please.
Yeah, for sure. Of course. So thank you, Samantha, first of all, for having me here. I'm Gereon Hempel. I'm originally from Germany, and I founded 21 Consulting in 2023. Before that, I spent around 10 years at Volkswagen in the procurement department, specifically working on transportation, logistics, and services. And that time was about evenly split, 5 years in Mexico, 5 years in the United States. And then I thought, well, I have seen many suppliers actually make the same mistakes, right, when it comes to contract negotiations. And I sat on the other side of the table. So what I do now at 21 Consulting are two things. One is sales consulting, but not the way that you're doing it, because you're the sales guru, and I'm clearly not. But I know what mistakes were made by the suppliers when it comes to how to communicate and get bigger contracts from a larger clients. What do they want to see? How to negotiate, right? Because you're usually pitched against other suppliers. So there are major risks of underbidding yourself and then having a problem while you're in the contract, and as well as contract language, right? I have seen suppliers really being at the brink of bankruptcy because they accepted contract terms that were just not favorable. They were planning on everything going right, but then something went wrong, and those chargebacks can really kill you. And then the other aspect of what I'm doing is actually procurement consulting. So if you think of a company that I would say two major expenses. One is personnel, and the other one is everything that you're buying. So I help optimize that, because every dollar that is saved there goes directly into your profits.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I love having shippers on the show and talking about them. I also love having people who formerly sat on that side of the table and now get to work on both sides. This is awesome. So this is a perfect fit, and excited to talk through some things. I never lack in questions, so I have plenty of questions to ask you today. We'll get through as many as we can. But one of the first things that I have to ask you about, and when I hear your story, is you spent 5 years working and living in Mexico, I think, right? And so
That's right.
what has been your experience in, I think you started in Mexico, you said, when we were talking earlier, in 2013. So when I think of Mexico, that was a little before I was involved in domestic logistics. So I don't really know what was going on in Mexico in 2013. But I know that a lot has changed in the global supply chain just since the pandemic. And there's been a lot of this nearshoring activity and increase in cross-border activity. But we've also seen increases in additional problems with doing business with Mexico, just security risks and border crossing. And so I want to hear from you, anything you have to share on what's been going on between Mexico and the US as far as trade, but specifically transportation and transportation options.
Yeah. So 2013, I think, is just so long ago. It was just a different time. And I also started my career, to be very honest with you. I think if you can describe the relationships, because I like to talk about relationships between suppliers and then clients, it was exactly that, a client vendor relationship, very transactional. And the power dynamics were just crazy to me sometimes, because suppliers really waited on the hallways sometimes for hours just to get an audience with you. It was really a restricted access area where you could only get in if somebody let you in. And that has definitely changed, right? Because I think many big shippers now know that you cannot treat anybody transactionally and then change them out every 3 years. So that is something that has definitely changed, right? Suppliers were not walking away in 2013. They would accept what I just mentioned, contract terms, prices that were almost imposed by the shipper. And that has definitely changed by now. So that is one thing. And then specifically for transportation, I think that Mexico is more digitized right now, and it's also connected to the United States and Canada, right? So you have a very diligent, loyal workforce in Mexico that you don't always have here in the United States and Canada. Let's be honest. I'm not
Okay.
trying to offend anybody, right? But that
Yeah.
is definitely the case. They really work for, and they're proud to be part of a specific company, and that hasn't changed since 2013.
Yeah.
And so that was a little bit of my experience there, and we can talk about, of course, what has changed since then. But those would be two major aspects that I can think about immediately.
Yeah. And when you guys were, because Volkswagen has a large presence in Mexico, and so
Mhm.
a lot of automotive companies do, honestly. And so as you guys have been operating, across all of North America and doing business cross border, I also like to ask, like, what type of partnerships did you see serve you the best as far as when we're
Mhm.
talking about the domestic transportation space? I know we have forwarders, we have brokers, we have asset fleet carriers. What was kind of your experience across those different types of partnerships? Did you guys evaluate all types of partnerships, or were there certain, like, I guess, pros or cons to different types of providers when you are playing in a global supply chain and all three countries, here, Mexico,
Yeah.
US, and Canada, not just one or the other?
Right. I think for some reason, the word broker has a negative connotation with automotive OEMs,
Right.
because they think, okay, you're going to bid this specific load out every single day,
Yeah.
which is not true, right? So I would frame it a little bit differently. But to answer your question, um, there seems to be a shift. Previously, I would say about 30 to 40% of your overall network should definitely be asset based, but brokers have been becoming so reliable that that is definitely now a conversation that can be had, right? And it's all about transparency. Okay, who are you going to be subcontracting over
Right.
the contract time frame? Who are you going to work with? Can the client have a look at them? Maybe visit the cross dock with you. Things like that can just change the whole perception, right? Because
Mhm.
in the end, there will always be a different truck with a different logo in your yard that you contracted with. I think it's just a dynamic that is normal now. So I think there's definitely a shift towards that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning, Kevin. I hope you're
Good
doing well.
morning, Ken.
I love what you said about that, and I actually want to give, uh, from my experience working with Volkswagen, but in general, I think the automotive industry might be a little bit advanced in that way of thinking, in that they, because of the way they structure contracts and they're looking at negotiations, there are expectations across certain types of industries where if they engage with a broker, that there's some level of transparency into the carrier side, and that there are pre-source carrier commitments. And so I
Mhm.
call that like a capacity in hand pre-source model in the brokerage space. And I do think that typically the people who play more in automotive understand that and are better at providing that service and sourcing those dedicated carriers. But I also give props to the automotive companies for understanding the benefits of allowing that broker to find those carriers, and introduce that capacity to their network, and
Yeah,
honestly
yeah.
playing the role that any good broker should be playing, but having that receptivity to that. So um, what are some of the various ways that people procure or move goods from Mexico to the US, and what went into your decision making, or how would you advise someone today? Because I know that we have, I don't know which one. I think there's Kansas City Southern, right? There's one major rail line that runs all the way through now, I think, to Canada.
That's
Um,
true. Yeah, right. Yeah,
so
you're
what
right.
are kind of, maybe just, that's one of my last questions probably about Mexico, is like, um pros and cons, ground transportation versus rail. If there's any other methods, I don't know, but what are some of the things you experienced?
I mean, short sea is an option for vehicles as well, right?
Okay.
And for materials too. So you can load your material on a sea container and then ship it from Veracruz to one of the East Coast ports, or maybe from the West Coast of Mexico to California and Oregon and so forth. So I think if we go through it step by step, you can put your material or your cars on rail. And I think an upside is that you're probably going to lower your costs. The downside is you have two railroads in Mexico. One is Ferromex, and the other one is Kansas City Southern de Mexico, which is now owned by Canadian Pacific, right?
Right.
Kansas City goes to the eastern part towards Laredo, and then Ferromex goes towards Ciudad Juarez. And the downside here is that you don't have much competition, right? So you will not have any buying power there because they're most likely bigger than you, right? And I experienced that too, which is good, but you're going to save some money there, right? And then another thing that is always coming up, there is like a pool of rail cars in between Mexico, United States, and Canada. So there needs to be a constant flow south and a constant flow north between the two. So for that whole cycle to actually work. So sometimes you have some problems there when not enough rail cars are coming back to actually load and then ship up north, because there is more flow up north than there is going south. So
yeah, and I know that from experience that goes the same for the ground side as well, ground transportation, because I've worked with carriers who would attest that they charge more coming out of Mexico because it's sometimes they might have to run empty all the way back just to reposition their trucks and get them back down to the border, across the border, or take a load somewhere closer, as close as they can get, into Texas, and then deadhead the rest of the way down. So I think that there's definitely an imbalance there, and I could see how that makes things difficult too, or at least goes into the pricing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can always talk to your client and say, do you have any empties, any racks or whatever that you need to transport back, right? So empty containers and so forth, that can sometimes create a loop. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, now I want to get into something that I think I could talk about all day. I know we've talked about it before. A lot of what you do when you introduce yourself, you talk about contracts and consulting to help negotiate and things like that between these parties. So you sat on the side of the large corporation, on the shipper side of the industry, and you have a very good understanding of what's going on in all of these contracting and negotiation conversations and sourcing and procurement roles when you're looking at services. So I would love to understand more just on what you're doing now to help these suppliers or vendors. We're talking either a trucking company, a brokerage, or some type of 3PL or forwarder or warehousing company. When you're working with them, what are some of the things that you see? I guess I don't want to say go wrong the most, but like, what are some of the areas that you find you address the most when you're working with these people to help them understand how they can improve?
It starts actually from the very beginning. How to introduce yourself, right? Let's type up an email, prepare a presentation. What would somebody in procurement at a larger firm who probably is going to look at your email for 30 seconds at most before they're either deleting it or deciding to answer, what should be in there, right? So I'm starting with that, but then it goes, okay, most of these companies are bidding out their contracts, and let's say that's a 3 to 5 year cycle. Most suppliers addressed me like a month before I was issuing the bid at best, or when it was already issued because they heard it somewhere. So how to establish a cadence of communication so that there is a bid coming out and you're on the bidder list, right? Because you can't perform a great service without actually being seen, right? So that is the thing. And then in a more advanced stage, negotiations, right? I help them read the negotiation tactics that are being applied. I also advise them sometimes I have to say, it's better to walk away here because you're exposing yourself to too much risk. Maybe you're underbidding yourself, and then contracts are a big thing as well. I'm not a lawyer, right? But I
Mm.
work with lawyers, and I think I do a fairly decent job in helping translate contracts into the real world. And one advice that I have always given to people working with is put some examples in your contracts that are super easily understandable. What happens in this very bad case? What is going to happen to me? Because the very bad case will happen, and you
Yeah.
need to protect yourself from that, right? It's like investing. You need to stay alive.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
kidding. Yeah, I know Graham left a comment too, and he was talking about the insurance side, of course, but he said autos and auto parts are one of the top stolen commodities. Have to work with experts that know the routes and have means of protection. So I just wanted to that made me think of if you were in your initial message, you talk about outreach, right? If you're someone who has expertise in a certain space, making sure you're setting yourself up for success by presenting what you do well, right? And speaking to that experience, but then also understanding the risk that you're taking on when you're partnering with these companies if you're going to be hauling high theft items or things like that.
Yeah, for sure. For
Um,
sure. And your procurement team that you're working with, that they should be your internal voice at the shipper, right? Because
right.
they are not there to only make their internal client, the planning department or somebody else happy, but they're the most vested, they have the most vested interest in making you successful. Because in the end, the procurement department are the ones who are closing the contracts. If something goes wrong, they have to resolve it, and they have to explain themselves, right? So I think the question was about insurance. If the insurance limits that are demanded are super high, I would just item that out and make it very clear here. Because the insurance limits are so high, I'm actually going to have to charge you X amount more
I
because I
think
have to price my risking.
all right. This is where I think we're gonna get into a good conversation here because from experience, it seems that the tone has been set lately in the industry with the larger corporation is, the harsher the tone. And it is more so, these are our terms, take it or leave it.
Mhm.
We don't really need you if you can't accept our terms. And I have a lot of conflicting like thoughts that go into that because I understand, especially publicly
Two,
traded
yeah.
corporations needing to protect themselves. But I also think that I have personally seen a lot of contracts with things that are just unnecessary or costly, or maybe I don't even know sometimes if these companies understand the cost implications to their suppliers just to add all this additional liability coverage or whatever it is to make sure that they're compliant with their terms, or what it could mean for them to take on some of this penalty like language and financial penalty language that I see in contracts. So
Yeah.
I think that large in part, there have been a lot of just sign it, don't redline it, sign it as is. We have to take that risk. It's the risk of doing business with these companies. What are your thoughts? And is that like necessarily the right approach, or how would you advise someone to be considering these contracts?
There's no general answer, but there is an idea. Why don't you offer two scenarios? One is here, I'm accepting your liability limits and it's going to cost you $1 million. And here is an alternative quote with the liability coverage that I already have and that I would feel comfortable in accepting. And this would cost you $800,000 per year, right? Just making up a number. And get that to procurement,
Yeah.
right? Then also a little bit of expectation management. You might not change your client's contract immediately during the bid at hand, but the more you speak up, the more they do have to listen. And maybe for the next time around, they will make some changes, right? Because you have to think about it this way. As a procurement department, you need to make sure that you can compare all the offers that you have at hand. And if somebody is issuing an offer that is less risky because the liability is less, you can effectively not fairly compare them anymore.
Right.
And that's a problem, right? So because you also want to take a fair decision, at least that's what I wanted to do, a fair decision in between all of the suppliers and really let the numbers and the terms and conditions speak.
Yeah. No, I do. I kind of echo your thoughts there on like maybe that first year or that initial contract. And there is so much gray area in contracting in specifically transportation. A lot of
Mhm.
companies now they issue a contract. Sometimes they send the contract out in the RFI process prior to a bid process. And if you don't just sign it and return it, you're not even going to get access to the actual bid
Yeah,
event. And so I've had a lot of people ask about this before, and that what's the best approach here? Do we just sign this contract as is and then proceed with the bid? And then if we get an award, do we need to double back and look at having a conversation on are we actually exposed? But I've never really heard of that going well, because then
yeah.
it's like that's exactly why that supplier puts it out at the beginning, because their expectation is if you sign it, this won't be a post bid conversation. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like that. I don't know. It's like a cat and mouse game there, but I don't think that there's an easy answer. I don't think you and I are certainly going to come up with like this perfect answer to solve all the problems in this space. But what's kind of like the decision making process that you would like work through with someone who is sitting here trying to go through this debate within what should we do?
So first of all, I would read through the contract, right? And then I would also do, sometimes we get scared by large numbers, right? So we see a liability limit that is just insane. And I would then say, okay, let's apply an example internally here and see if it's really that bad. That would be a first
Mhm.
step. And then if you really can't live with it, but you have to sign it, I would probably sign it with a note that says, depending on the specific contract that we're going to negotiate, I will have to reevaluate this
Yeah.
contract that I'm signing. And the good news should be that if they're making you sign a very general contract at the beginning, it's probably pretty general, as I just said, right? So it's probably not 100% focused on your lane from Puebla to Kansas City,
Hmm.
right? It is going to be broader. And
Yeah.
so then, and I actually, if I was in procurement, I would also looked at most of the I understand where they're coming from, right? They
Mhm.
want to ensure they're not against anybody, but they want to make sure that there is a fair comparison. I
Yeah.
think I said that before, but I wanted to reiterate that. So that is something that is very, very important, I think, to mention. So
So you're saying that as like it level sets everyone, right? Where you're not trying to, as a procurement decision maker, you're not trying to keep in the back of your mind when you're looking at rates and capacity and what they're offering, also then considering what limits are they carrying, what are they capable of,
yeah,
signing, are they able to do this, or like, because you already know that at least from when it comes to all the terms in your contract, everyone's on a level set playing field if they've already, at least agreed
exactly.
to something. Okay, that makes sense.
Contract negotiations are the most like the most headaches ever. And I mean, it's if you have a commercial negotiation, that's tough already.
Yeah.
But then if you get into the weeds of contract language, well, that can delay your project for months. So I do understand where they're coming from, 100%, right? I used to do the same thing. I said, here is my contract. I would like you to sign it, right? And then we see what's happening. But there can be over the long term some flexibility. Show a business case, right? Show what the other clients are doing. Maybe you have a best case scenario and it's working really, really well. And then, of course, show your past performance, right, to gain some confidence.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of like Graham's last comment that said, many shippers will also show flexibility, and then he was saying that some will have really tough parameters on things. So when we're looking at parts of that, and then also Cody mentioned that every company seems to have different insurance requirements, and some of the numbers can get confusing.
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing here, obviously, is one of the most Mm, I think one of the most focused on, and I can speak to this because when I was a broker and I would get a contract, the things I would immediately go to would, sure, there's like indemnification and some other things, but you'd also always look at the insurance immediately, because
Yeah.
nothing has the ability to impact that company's fixed operational costs so quickly as having to rework your entire COI and the terms that you're carrying on your insurance policy. And I think unfortunately what we've seen in the space lately is shippers who are hearing about like these nuclear verdicts and all of these terrible cases that happen, and they're just like, forget it. Like, we're just going to go out there and we want 5 million this, 2 million this, like, and they're just asking for all of these higher price terms. But I think that part of what I wish we did a better job of understanding is that kind of two-way flow of communication between like suppliers and these larger corporations. And we can talk on this too, but I think a lot of that disconnect is we're actually talking about a legal team, not procurement, right? That's
Yep,
creating
yep.
these in many cases. So maybe there needs to be communication between procurement teams and legal teams. And then on the flip side, procurement teams and their suppliers and their vendors who are bidding or are currently an incumbent or partnered with them. Because I think that you need to have some level of understanding of the cost that goes into being compliant for your partners and how that cost is going to have to be passed back through to you if you're the reason that they have to justify carrying it. So I think it actually impacts that shipper's bottom line at the end of the day. So what are your thoughts on all of this? How do we improve that communication, or is there anything that can be done to kind of ground that?
So for some reason, I think everybody's always afraid of getting the two legal teams together. And I do understand that. But at the same time, friction usually brings some sort of solution. And that sort of solution sometimes is, okay, I'm going to walk away. And that's okay. But there needs to be somebody from the sales team of the carrier and then the procurement department to facilitate that discussion and sort of translate it into the real world, right?
Yeah.
And see, okay, is this really this bad? We're really trying to find a solution, set the tone also. We have negotiated this for, let's say, 6 months. We really need to find a solution, right? And then usually the tone changes. So incentives, align them, share them openly. That's what I would say, right? What do you want to do? And then talk through it. Yes, it might be a little bit painful, but if everybody expects it to be a little bit painful, but they also know that at the end of this discussion, there is going to be a solution and we'll hopefully have a fruitful relationship, then I think the conversations actually change. And it's a problem. It's a solution finding exercise, right?
Yeah.
It's not about you against me, right? So people usually when they come into a room, the one party sits on the one side and the other party sits on the other side. That is already something that I would change, right? I would sit with the supplier together or whatever, or let's find some sort of a setup so that everybody is actually collaborating and finding a solution together. Because you're this close, right?
I witnessed this one time. One time I was so frustrated with a contract. And of course I'm working with, transportation procurement, and I'm hearing back. It's putting two people in the middle of every conversation when you have sales and procurement and legal on the outsides. And it was one of those, hey, can my lawyer talk to your lawyer type of thing. And we got the lawyers together and I listened. I mean, we barely did anything, right? Like, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know really what's going on. But I remember the speed at which they were able to just talk through some red lines and just go, oh, okay. Yeah, no, we'll scratch that. No, we'll update that. Yeah, no, I got it. I see where you're coming from. I heard that. And I was like, are you kidding me? Because I think when we put people in the middle of that, we're kind of conditioned to not see where they're coming from. And like, we know that lawyers are expensive. We know this is a pain for our company. We know that things need to be accomplished. And we kind of bring in like a lack of understanding, but also an agenda to get something done. And I don't think that's a very good combination. And so there's not usually a great receptivity to it to get the lawyers together. But at the end of the day, I think you save so much time and you can get so much accomplished when you can work through it and just get the sources directly together instead of putting all these people in the middle.
100%. Just share what you want to achieve and then make it a collaborative problem-solving exercise. Yeah, couldn't have said it better.
Okay, well, I'm in sales and brand strategy consulting. You do a little bit of sales consulting, so I can't help myself but ask you here as we're coming up on time. You sat on the side of a shipper for many years. You had a title that would definitely make people aware that you could, make decisions in evaluating new suppliers or new partners on the transportation side. So as someone who has seen a lot of outreach from different people or been solicited and probably cold called and everything else, what is some of the advice that you can give to suppliers looking to break into, let's specifically, I want to kind of customize this to providers who want to get into a larger space, like a company with Volkswagen, like a more enterprise system, what do they need to know and understand as they're trying to present and position themselves for an opportunity to get access to work with someone like you?
Okay. I think the first thing that is crucial is it's not going to happen tomorrow. I have had outreach that was like, hey, we would love to start shipping with you. We have some trucks that are empty or available for you. I said, well, that's awesome, but we do go through bid processes, and we do this very cyclical, and we plan for it, and it takes some time. So that is why reaching out before a bid comes out and establishing a relationship is super important, right? I would send an email with an attachment of 3 to 5 pages. I personally did not care too much about the company history, but more about what have you done, right? So here is what we would imagine a similar client, and we have done this and this for them.
Yeah.
Right. So that catches my attention because I have an incentive in procurement. My lever is competition. So I want you to be in there, and then describe exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. We are very strong in the northern part of Mexico, shipping into Texas, as an example. Right. And then I know, okay, and that's cool. And then you can say, hey, would it be okay if I visit you within the next 2 or 3 months? That's about a reasonable time frame, right? That's not saying
not next week, not next
week, not necessarily next Tuesday. And then, well, wait for it. But then also, you don't have to hide. It's okay to send a follow-up email too, because I tried to get back to everybody, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Because I got too many emails. I forgot about it, whatever. I did schedule some time at the end of each week to answer to these requests, but bulk replies aren't cool either, right? So reach out again and say, hey, I'm going to be in the area or whatever. Can I visit you for half an hour? And then when you get that meeting, be respectful of the time. That is something that I have not seen, that I have seen people do many times, is just, okay, 30-minute meeting is a 30-minute meeting.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Like, be super respectful. That made always a great impression. There were a few people who actually did that and say, hey, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're almost up. And then I would usually say, hey, I have 15 minutes more. Right. So, but that is super important. Be respectful of your client's time.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that what you said about when you reach out in an email, or however you're soliciting someone, when you tell them what you're currently doing, and what your strengths are, and you will know instantly as the shipper decision maker if that aligns with what you're doing. What I actually don't agree with, and I've heard this preached a lot. Maybe this needs to be my Free Friday this week. I'm just, now that I'm thinking of it.
Okay.
People will say, like, I need to show them that I understand their business. And so they take that so far as to write a whole email saying, hi, Gereon, I see that you guys are doing cross-border logistics between, and they just tell you what you already know you're doing. But then it's like, we can help you with that. And it's like, okay, but you would have been better served to just say, hi, Gereon, I'm reaching out to you because I know that you guys are running cross-border business. Our fleets specialize in, freight from Puebla to Kansas City. I'm not sure if this aligns with your network exactly, but I'd like to talk to you more about how our, 50 trucks are able to operate where we cross in Laredo. And then when they just describe what they do, you can make a very quick decision on if that's something that would fit your network and is worth a conversation or not. I think people get so caught up in trying to show I did my research on you, but doing your research doesn't mean that you didn't allow them the opportunity to understand what you do and if you would be a good fit. It just shows that you know how to use Google. And I tell people that all the time, like, congratulations, you can Google Volkswagen's locations on Google.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean anything.
For sure. I mean, I think it's important. Yes, you should do a couple of things like spelling your client's company's name right. Things like that. That's, of course, very important, right? Because that's the first thing you see, right? You say, I don't know, Samantha Jones Trucking and Volkswagen with an O or something. You're like, okay. But I would agree. talk about what you can do. And most of the research will be done later when you're participating in a bid and you have to read a 100-page scope of work.
I love that.
Yeah.
Don't worry, your research is coming. Just save your energy.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Gereon, thank you so much for coming on today. If people are interested in connecting with you, I actually already put a comment in there before the show started with your free
Cool.
strategy session link. So anyone can go check that out, book a meeting with him just to get better introduced. I can tell you he's definitely someone worth taking some time to network and connect with. We've had some great conversations, but what's a good way for people to reach out other than that if they didn't want to do that, or email or phone or anything like that you prefer?
Right. Yeah, I think we will post the link to my email address and then also my phone number in the comments afterwards. So yeah, but I can also say it's Gereon at 21consulting.xyz. So just send me an email or book a free strategy session. Thank you
Yes.
so much for having me, Samantha.
Absolutely. Thank you so much
Fun.
for coming on. This was a great conversation. And we scratched the surface of some important topics within
I know.
contracting. And you know what? I actually had a follow-up thought that I was going to say, if anyone's listening to this and you're like, I don't understand, why are we talking so much about contracting, or what is this? I did want to make a call out that legal contracts and negotiations are a lot more common and present in the enterprise space, more so than if you're handling SMB type situations. They might have very simple terms or not even necessarily formal contracts. And so if you are a carrier, a broker, someone like that who is interested in starting to explore, can I grow into these larger businesses, and can I kind of grow into these enterprise spaces? And then how would I handle things like contracts or negotiations, or what exactly comes with that? I would absolutely recommend they talk to you, Gereon, because I think that not everyone's engaging in this space, and there's just a lot of unknowns. And it's kind of one of those things that might keep people from feeling comfortable and confident in stepping their business up and taking it to the next level. And so partnering with a consultant who understands that space and what's going to come with it and what to prepare for before you get into that would definitely be helpful. So if anybody listening has any questions or has never really had to engage in these types of contract negotiations, maybe it would be worth booking that strategy session with Gereon and seeing if that's something that you guys can grow into. So thank you so much to everyone who listened in today. And I also want to give a shout out to my sponsor, Ty. TMS, we talk a lot on the show about efficiencies, and Ty has done an excellent job of helping brokers really optimize their operational processes and run more efficient operations. And hey, efficient operations help you control costs and help you perform better, which helps you sell better into shippers, especially in the enterprise space when you're talking and approaching people like a Volkswagen, for example. So if you guys are interested in learning more about Ty, you can reach out to me directly. Happy to answer any questions, or you can check out their website right there in the comments. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gereon, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
You're very kind for having me. Thank you.
I hope everyone had a great time meeting us for coffee.